and prior to the policy change. Moving on to another matter, which is the existence of Hikvision and Dawa cameras in the Department of Defence. I submitted a question on notice on the 29th of November asking Defence about whether or not they had these cameras on any Defence sites, and the answer came back to me on the 7th of February, and the answer was there was one system at one site which was in the process of being removed. However, in a comment provided or in information provided to the Australian newspaper on the 14th of February, the media said that in fact there were 42 cameras on Defence sites. Can someone explain to me the reason for the disparity between the information given to the Australian newspaper and the answer provided in the question on notice?
Senator Celia Perkins, Deputy Secretary, Security and Estate Group. Senator, as we discussed at the last session of estimates, we've been looking at this issue for some time now. Our initial approach was to use our Garrison Estate Management System, the database where we record details of all the physical assets on the estate, and the answer to the question on notice you referred to there came from that interrogation of data. We've since, and I think I mentioned this at the last estimates, at the direction of the Deputy Prime Minister, undertaken a much more detailed physical audit of every part of the estate. As that work progressed, as we went out and looked more closely at that diversity of the estate, at points in time the number that we've been in a position to count has changed. We believe we're now in a definitive position. Okay,
and what's that definitive number?
So we completed the full physical audit of the estate, Senator, and I'm just pulling up the details as I talk with you here. A little while ago, we found more devices than we had registered. We now have a complete register of a little over 10,000 individual devices in a smaller number of systems. And as we did that work, we found additional devices by manufacturers of concern. The total number of devices was 435. We removed as many of them as we could immediately. Sometimes they were in locations where we needed specialist equipment to get to them, and in some cases we needed to leave them on for work health and safety or other reasons. We are now working through a process of getting to complete removal of devices, and we are on track to have that completed by the 30th of June.
So you told me in response to a question on notice that there was one. You told the media there was 42, but there was in fact 435.
Yes, Senator.
That's extraordinary.
Senator, the estate is a vast and complex thing, and the full physical audit was difficult to undertake. I think I've mentioned here before that involved a physical survey of 30,000 built structures. We took the direction from the Deputy Prime Minister seriously to look in lots of places we perhaps hadn't before. And when you think about the estate, it's not just office buildings and aircraft, control towers, but daycare centres and homes. And as we looked at, shops and coffee points, we've had the opportunity now to both record much better set of data and start in that really vast swath of places a replacement program. So by the 30th of June, the number will be 0.
Well, I welcome that. I'm glad that will happen, and I think it is the right thing that in response to the questions on notice I submitted and the media coverage that the DPM ordered that audit, and I'm glad we got to the bottom of that. But it does make me wonder, had these questions never been asked, would we have unknowingly just wandered on, not realising we had over 400 devices from, as you say, manufacturers of concern? I mean, that's extraordinary. Would Defence have come across this in any other way had these questions not been asked?
Senator, as I've said in testimony in this committee before, the security policy and guidance that we use, I suppose, is kind of the other way round, where we first focus on what is most sensitive, and we use a system of risk assessment and accreditation when we're making choices about those more sensitive sites. So as we've done this work starting in 2008, late last year and through this year, at every point we've asked ourselves questions in line with government security policy. None of the devices that we found were internet connected, and that's a really important security control. And when I look at those last few devices that we're working through now, they were almost entirely in places that we would consider of low security concern, daycare centres, for instance. So often we'll have a daycare centre on a base. We wouldn't have paid as much attention from a security perspective because it's not located where we're operating more sensitive capabilities. The 100% physical audit gave us an opportunity to look at sites where we would have been less focused with a security lens on, and now we'll move to the endpoint.
Oh, look, I accept both of those points you make. It is much more dangerous if they are internet connected, and it is obviously more concern if it is in a sensitive area rather than a less sensitive area. But nonetheless, you're removing them all, so you recognise there is a risk. Let's not pretend that these are perfectly fine products to have, otherwise you wouldn't be removing them, right?
We are moving with the rest of the government on the government's direction to remove those devices, yes.
Yeah, which is appropriate.
It is appropriate, and a direction that could have been given much earlier by a previous government, but wasn't.
Yes, and these questions could have been asked earlier by previous opposition, but also weren't. It wasn't until I asked about this and revealed their existence that action has occurred.
Senator, I am simply making the point that I believe this was canvassed at the last estimates, including the fact that opportunities were provided to your government as early as 2018 to deal with this matter. Within a handful of months of coming to government, the DPM ordered a comprehensive and holistic assessment of the defence supply chain. It's appropriate that that has occurred, and the officials are explaining to you what they are doing, but I do think it is just worth placing the direction of your questions in some context. I will point out that former Senator Kitching has also asked questions about this matter.
As I've said before, Minister, I welcomed the DPM's instruction to conduct this audit, and I welcome the government's decision to remove these devices. I've repeatedly publicly said that. But, of course, it only did occur after this came to media attention, which occurred as a result of the audit that I conducted. Moving on to kind of a broader issue, through the Defence Industry Security Program and the accreditation program process for defence industry, has Defence given any thought to whether or not it's appropriate to have these kind of devices in defence industry and whether or not that should be a requirement for accreditation?
Senator, we have. We are working closely across government on the policy settings that will be appropriate for these issues. The broader Commonwealth policy, generally, security policy is managed by the Attorney-General's Department, and as I think we've discussed here before, technical security determinations are made based on the input from the authorities for that. So in the consideration of foreign manufactured devices, we've had some experience on working through these, and we would take advice from the relevant security agencies. That would include ASD, the Australian Cyber Security Centre, ACOT4 and so forth. The Attorney-General's Department have recently stood up a technical security forum as a sub-element of the Government Security Committee, and in that forum we're working through what might be the necessary policy adjustments. Now, what we continue to do in defence, as I said, is to make risk-based judgments on the technical security risk of devices in the instances in where they fit. So that is under active discussion and consideration about what the policy setting might need to be into the future.
Okay. Defence industry have approached me and asked me, if we have these cameras, should we get rid of them? Is it likely to be a requirement of DISP accreditation in the future? What clarity can you provide for them? Because some of them are contemplating, new site fit-outs right now and wondering, is it a good idea to go for these cameras or, maybe a more expensive but safer alternative?
So when we work with companies on their DISP accreditation and the physical accreditation of their spaces, that's a really joined up process. There is no policy, whole of government policy guidance at this point. When we work with companies, again, that would be based on what kind of work they were doing, what kind of facility. We would be sharing with them the approach we're taking and the risk assessments we've been undertaking. I should say I want to thank my colleagues in our CIO organisation because we've done some additional supply chain assessments in order to have confidence in the devices we'll be replacing these devices with moving forward.
That sounds sensible.
Patterson,
yeah.
If I could,
Please.
in a number of companies, Greg Moriarty, Secretary of the Department of Defence, a number of defence industry players have approached me on similar issues, and I've been very clear in drawing attention to all of the defence industry players that I've spoken to, our policy, the steps that we have taken and the direction the DPM gave us.
Yeah, look, and I think that's appropriate. Ms Perkins, though, you said there isn't a whole of government policy on this. To minister to you, shouldn't there be a whole of government policy? If it's not safe to have on a childcare centre on a defence base, surely it's not safe to have in defence industry working with the government to provide the future capability that we need, some of which is highly commercially sensitive, some which involves classified information.
Senator, I'll take on notice the specific approach that, as I've indicated on a couple of occasions, I am not sworn to this portfolio. I'll take your question on notice about the government's intentions in that regard. But again, I observe that the DPM has indicated a comprehensive examination of defence supply chains to ensure that defence is not using devices, products or contractors of concern. The balance of your question as to how broadly that might extend, I will take on notice and discuss with the DPM.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks very much, Senator Patterson. Senator Shoebridge.